This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
And welcome into episode number 128 here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Myself, Noah Grant, and my co-host, as always, Nick Maxon. For those of you who don't know, Noah royally effed up the beginning of the show, and we had to redo it again, so it's fine. We're doing it live now. Anyway,
Noah, just to admit it, you're suffering from a case of multiple personality disorder, and you thought that you were me and you were still you. So
why do I suddenly feel shorter and like I don't have a set of hands? Anyway, whoa.
Video would prove otherwise, but that's okay.
Yeah, well. We're on the come up, I think. Speaking of a team that certainly is doing very well, the number one team in the NCHC, at least for what we picked for next season, they're on the docket in our second to last NCHC preview. That's what we're going to go over in today's show. A very abbreviated Huskies Illustrated weekly roundup. Some pretty interesting tidbits, actually. Some pretty big signings late in the season, as well as Hall of Fame induction. Some team that's going to be playing in a building that's a lot smaller than they're used to, and a lot of other interesting tidbits that I think will be well worth your time, actually. And then extra ice session, we're going to talk about the Women's World Championships, kind of wrapping that up. And unfortunately, that's not the only thing we have to talk about related to the Women's Worlds. A certain organization certainly just doesn't want to stay out of the limelight for all the wrong reasons.
No.
With that being said, we start with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Center Ice View News and Notes, Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah. And, I don't fish very often. I maybe go once a year for a couple of days when I'm up at the cabin. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, other NHL teams, they went fishing this week, and some of them, they caught some pretty big fish. So in Ottawa, they didn't say catch a fish, but they definitely, kept him on the hook, per se. That we're talking about Tim Stützle.
Might as well dive right in here.
Yeah, diving right in. 8 years. $8.35 million per season. That's a total package of $66.8 million for the German phenom. Holy cow. Slight overpayment? Do you think, Noah, or no?
It's interesting. Also, the Sens adding Eric Brandstrom on the back end for another year as well, too. The defenseman kind of really hasn't broken out the way that he has hoped so far. So Sens kind of looking for him to produce a little bit more. But Tim Stützle is certainly no stranger to the production wise. Again, it kind of goes back to a little bit of what we talked about with Tage Thompson last week. And it looks like an overpay until he performs the way that he has. I think that his ceiling has not yet been reached as a player. So I think it looks like a steal if he continues to progress the way the Sens think he's going to. Right now, you're maybe paying a little bit more up front for what you're getting. But I think there's no doubt that he's going to be a superstar in this league. And I think he's going to be part of that face of the franchise in Ottawa. So I think if he trends the way that he has, I don't think it will be an overpay. But I think this goes back, ironically enough, you talked about fishing after Labor Day in the middle of September. This is about the time where we had started to see Kirill Kaprizov get signed last year, and the same conversation surrounded him, and he certainly blew that out of the water, fishing puns all aside. So I think Tim Stützle is the same case. I think, what did he go third overall a couple years ago? Is that right? Is that right?
You know what? I'm not sure.
I can't remember. But I feel like Ottawa, they know what they have. And he's definitely a guy that I think will be worth that if he trends the way that he has been. So
Now, dare I say, I kind of tricked you there because I almost think this is going to look more team friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
Close. And I say that because let's remember the offseason Ottawa's had. Alex
Very good
DeBrincat.
one.
Who am I missing?
Claude Giroux.
Claude Giroux. Just to name a few.
Some guy by the name of Cam Talbot.
Cam Talbot. So, the right amount of talent and dare I say pretty darn good talent around him. This may be actually a steal of a contract that we may look back on and say, whoa, yikes, Ottawa, you kind of got fleeced there. And good for Tim Stützle for inking that term. Because now you're locked in throughout your prime years too as well. I think 29 or at least 30 when the contract does end. So I think good for both sides, honestly. As you mentioned, Sens also adding Eric Brandstrom. Speaking of fishing ponds, because we can't go along because we've started this. How about the one that got away from the Minnesota Wild, right? There were talks around this player. We're talking JT Miller, where Vancouver maybe was looking to sell last year, the deadline, but then Bruce, there it is. Switch that one around. And how about this? He's not going to be going away anytime soon if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan. 7-year extension, $8 million a season. Still 1 year left at $5.25 for his previous deal before that one kicks in. So that means he'll be 37 years of age when this last year of this next extension does come to an end. So I think this is good for Vancouver. I think they are trending in the right direction. I like a few of the little things that they've done with the new regime. And again, locking up, I think is going to be a key piece, especially down the middle there for the Canucks that are in JT Miller.
Yeah, my price point was 7 years, $7 million is what I was thinking. So, $1 million more per season average annual value. And he's a guy that, he slots in the top 6 and just is a reliable centerman. He's someone that you're going to get a lot of utility from. And I think as he gets longer and longer into his contract, provided obviously he stays healthy, he's someone that you slot in that middle 6 or that third line role as he starts to deteriorate like most NHLers do. And he's still very serviceable as a centerman that could be very versatile in that role. So I think it's a great signing for Vancouver. And really, we entered the season thinking the Canucks maybe might not be able to pull some things off and somebody was going to be on their way out. I think alleviating that Travis Hamonic contract really helped. That was kind of a godsend for them. And then they were able to find that found money, essentially, with JT Miller inside him. So I think it's a good pickup for the Canucks. And really, Vancouver is a curious case in terms of the way that they're trending, because they are a team that it's hard to get a read on them. But I feel like they got better over the offseason, or really kind of laid their foundation for what they're going to be moving forward. And really, you can't really have said that for Vancouver in the past couple of seasons. It's kind of a topsy-turvy little ride in the past couple of years.
It has, and dare I say, if anything, Vancouver looking to really just try to keep the train rolling. I mean, they had an outside chance to crack a playoff spot in the Pacific Division. Late last year, they were one of the hotter teams in the second half in the entire National Hockey League. And so, if anything, just trying to keep most of those same pieces together, I think they did that. And as you mentioned, maybe shed a little bit of excess weight. Curious case, as you mentioned, they may be sort of that unsung dark horse in the Pacific Division this year if things go right for them. We'll have to wait and see, but locking up a key piece down the middle for them was a big part of that off-season puzzle. Let's head out east, staying north of the border, right? Canadians and Kirby Dach, the recently acquired forward from the Chicago Blackhawks, 4 years, $3.36 million per season with them. 21 years of age. There's still a lot of ceiling left for this kid. Only 26 points in 70 games last year. But honestly, Noah, do you kind of feel like this was a down year in it for a down franchise, and there's a lot more to be had with Kirby Dach?
Yeah, I mean, career high technically for him with 26 points in 70 games last year. Interesting to see if he flourishes a little bit more. Montreal is kind of what Chicago hopes to maybe be in about a year or two, slowly trending in the right direction. So maybe he'll find more success. He'll certainly get a kick at the can and some good opportunity. I think whether or not he's able to take that in stride, I don't know. He kind of gave the impression early on that maybe he did a little bit better in sheltered minutes, maybe surrounded by some veteran guys. So we'll have to see how his deployment is used with Marty St. Louis and that coaching staff there. But I like the price point. It really, for someone who does, like you mentioned, have a potential ceiling that is much higher than what we saw, it's not a terrible price point. 4 years, is a long time if it doesn't go well. but he's only 21. So a lot of development, I think, to be had for him. So not really that risky of a signing for Montreal. And I think it's going to pay off for them in the end.
I agree. Another move from the Canadians, also adding a restricted free agent net minor Caden Primo at 3 years, $890,000 per season. Speaking of the youth movement in Montreal, Caden Primo also very young, 23 years of age, 12 games played, 4.62 goals against average, 868 save percentage, and a 171 record. This is interesting because now with a giant question mark, it sounds like not only the season is lost for Carey Price, but potentially his NHL career could also be in jeopardy. And so now the Montreal Canadiens, you're never going to replace a Carey Price. You're never going to replicate maybe his skill set, essentially through trades, especially in today's NHL where the salary cap is at. So to me, it's a stopgap and probably looking to add maybe more of a true number one goaltender through the draft, maybe as early as next season, but Caden Primo getting a shot to at least an in-depth role with the Canadiens organization.
Yeah, certainly. Their goaltending situation has been put in flux. Their timeline hasn't been exactly clear for them, unfortunately. And as somebody from The Athletic put it, I can't remember who I had read the article from, the goalie market has been really undersaturated, so to speak, with the additions of Vegas and now Seattle. It's just you have goaltenders that sometimes it was few and far between to find true starters or even true capable backups in the NHL. And when you add 4 more positions on 2 more teams, essentially, I think it makes it all the more difficult. So Montreal put them with the list of many that are suddenly searching for goaltending help here in the National Hockey League.
100%. A couple of other just minor moves here. Sam Gagner signing a 1-year deal with the Winnipeg Jets. League minimum, essentially, 1 year, $750,000. 33-year-old player. He's definitely a veteran of the league. 31 points in 81 games for Detroit. I think the Red Wings are hoping for a little bit more of a surge there. But again, the Winnipeg Jets just getting a little bit of veteran depth there with Sam Gagner. And then also, just today, Mikey Anderson in Los Angeles re-upping the young defenseman at 1 year, $1 million. Mikey Anderson, I think more well known for getting absolutely walked by Kaprizov. But we know him more better as the former UMD Bulldog defenseman that's got a lot more two-way capability, and Los Angeles given another shot to prove that he belongs in the National Hockey League. I tend to agree with Los Angeles. I think he's got more of a ceiling, just needs a little bit more maturation. Again, defenseman, mature a little bit longer at that level.
Yeah, certainly. And, low risk, high reward, right? $1 million is not a big price point to pay. And, you kind of wonder about these guys that it takes them a little bit while to get a crack in the lineup. And then when they finally do, they kind of find their stride. I think of a guy that maybe is a good comparison, maybe like Derek Forbort a couple of years ago that played for Los Angeles and Minnesota as well. Kind of took him a while to get that opportunity. And then once he kind of established his footing a little bit, became a very reliable two-way defenseman who had a pretty decent little career in the National Hockey League. So good comparison. And ironically enough, also played for the Kings. So
speaking of getting a crack at things, right? A couple of professional tryout. It is PTO season, right? And a couple of names that all of us should know if you follow the National Hockey League. Zach Aston Reese, who's been, so we say a former Penguin now getting a PTO with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Speaking of low risk, high reward, that one I think is number one in most people's books if that works out. Yep. Calvin DeHaan, a PTO with Carolina, and Danny DeKeyser, the lifelong Detroit Red Wing, getting a PTO with none other the Vancouver Canucks, who could also use a little bit of depth to their lineup as well.
Yeah, certainly. I like the Zach Aston Reese look, like you mentioned, of course, was at Anaheim for a little bit too. And maybe a surprising name to see on there. I feel like he's been productive in a bottom 6 role in the National Hockey League, but Toronto's going to definitely give him a good look. Somebody that was, I don't know, maybe a depth player, kind of a middle 6 guy for much of his career, Matthew Perreault, retiring from the National Hockey League, only 34 years of age, and will join TVA Sports as a broadcaster for the organization. Only played in 25 games last year with Montreal, had 9 points, and kind of started to decline very rapidly. Of course, a little water bug, tiny little centerman, played for Winnipeg for many, many years, wearing number 85. Hit the 15-goal mark 5 times during his NHL career, eclipsed 40 points in a single season on 4 separate occasions, playing in just under 760 NHL games. So, he was a guy that just maybe was kind of flew under the radar a little bit, both stature-wise and production-wise.
Right, and I think most of his offense, I said that in the most Canadian accent way.
Yeah.
This offense.
The offense.
The offense coming actually as a member of the Washington Capitals too. Most of his memorable moments coming in a Capitals uniform. I think again, both Winnipeg and Washington wanting more from him. It just never really, panned out for him, which is unfortunate. Like you said, there were some moments here and there, but consistency was an issue with Matthew Perreault. And again, a player that I think looked at it as more of a guy that had a higher ceiling, just never really was able to really reach it. So it's unfortunate, but hey, he had a decent career in the National Hockey League, getting to over 700 games played. Again, the point totals, maybe even for himself, were probably some left on the table per se, maybe in Vegas terms, but still a pretty decent career, again, spanning over 700 games in the National Hockey League.
Certainly would agree. Speaking of someone who had a very lengthy career, Nick, this isn't in your notes because I just added it at the end. Ryan Miller, 2001 Hobey Baker Award winner, was a 2022 inductee to the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Along with former Wisconsin star, longtime USA Hockey exec Jim Johannesson, of course. Did a lot of good work with USA Hockey there, but no surprise here. I mean, Ryan Miller, probably the most successful U.S.-born goaltender in history. Ironically enough, ended up having a career where he didn't actually play goalie until the age of 12. He was playing in a hockey tournament and told his dad, if I do something, can I get some goalie gear? And his dad said, well, you got to score a hat trick. And he went out and buried 3. So, never looked back, and kind of crazy. One of the most successful NHL goaltenders, obviously. So, of course, remembering him, especially in the early days playing for Buffalo, I mean, he was just absolutely unstoppable in the net there. So well-deserved part of that first big outdoor game for Michigan State, as well as the Big House back in the early 2000s. So I'm sure you remember Ryan Miller probably a little bit better than I do, I would think.
Yeah, he was, the marquee goaltender in the mid to late 2000s. Again, when Buffalo was very competitive. Well, we talked about Buffalo last week with Tage Thompson and some of the names, going back to, Jochen Hesch. I mean, even throw Jason Pominville in there in his early days, was a very productive player. Some notable, maybe some one-offs, Maxim Afinogenov, to name another one. But also, more importantly, how funny is this? U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame in Eveleth, Minnesota. He played his last National Hockey League game here in St. Paul as a member of the Anaheim Ducks. So, and I think the Wild also gave him a very favorable, nice, respectable send-off in his final game there too. I think his parents were also inside the Xcel Energy Center when that happened. So kind of a fitting circle there when you talk about Ryan Miller there getting inducted to the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame here in the great state of Minnesota.
Yeah, everyone obviously excited for Ryan Miller, and they had to make sure that Milan Lucic didn't come through the middle on that one for sure.
Not only that, but also coming down on a dump in where Wheeler was out of the net. Yikes! Oh, geez. Yeah, I'll never forget.
I've never seen a goal. Never seen a goaltender flip that many times. It was crazy. But nonetheless, you're going to flip out when you hear this, Nick. Arizona, once again in the news. They are expecting they were expecting to sell out every game at the 5,000 seat Mullet Arena next season. Single game tickets, which are limited, will go on sale early next week. The average price is $170 per ticket, and the league average is $154. So actually not too shabby. And it sounds like, dare I say, it sounds like the novelty item of them playing in this building. It sounds like there's actually a lot of fan buzz and a lot of fan interest for people to go and catch an Arizona game down at that rink just to kind of be part of the experience. And as the Steve Dangle podcast alluded to, if it ends up working out where it helps grow the game and create that footprint for the next couple of decades for this organization, it will be a win for Arizona. It just doesn't look like it right now with all the brouhaha that's happened before. But I don't know, to be honest with you, I think it actually would be kind of fun to catch a game down in Arizona, to be honest with you. There is some sort of novelty and intimacy with having a building with fans so close and having all of those components so close to the ice sheet.
True. And from the fans' perspective, there's that novelty there too. The weird thing about it is, and I think, I don't know if this has been mentioned multiple times, but I know it's been reported that you talk about the margins or the profit. Apparently, they're getting more back per ticket on the dollar as the organization at Mullet Arena than they were at Gila River Arena in Glendale. So small jab to the city of Glendale there. Kind of funny. Yeah. But this is the weird part, is that behind the scenes, from what everything I'm hearing, is that, again, the National Hockey League, they'll never come out publicly and say this. The organization, and even the NHL Players Association, apparently quietly behind closed doors are not liking this as a long-term solution.
Right.
And dare I say that, this is still, and I think, dare I say the novelty of this is that there's still so much unknown about the Arizona Coyotes, right? Noah, that is, the Tempe, city council voted to continue negotiations. There's still technically not an approved arena deal yet for the Coyotes organization. Now, it's fully expected this fall that there would be a final decision to either, yes, you can go ahead and build this thing, or no, you can't build this thing on at least proposal number 1. I say that because there have been rumblings of a backup plan. Again, we're talking about the location specifically within Tempe. Still, dare I say, the novelty is more, I think, driven by the size of the arena, and more so, this could be either a 1-year ripoff. And I shouldn't say rip-off, but a 1-year case where the Coyotes organization are trying to find another home because they don't have one technically, or it could be the start of what maybe could be what was originally agreed to up to a 4 to 5 year deal to play at Mullet Arena. And as this thing is getting built, this thing meaning the Tempe plan as it was proposed to back in the spring. So I think it'd be fun in the novelty sense. You kind of wonder though, does the honeymoon phase wear off after year 1? Or does it, or is there a genuine buzz there? I think we have yet to see that, but kind of fun either way.
Yeah, well, like you said, the what it comes down to is, are we in the last couple of years of the Arizona Coyotes or not? Really, that's what the question actually is. So I think, if anyone, is taking a vacation down in Arizona, you can snag yourself a ticket. I would say go. Let us know how it is. I think it would be a lot of fun. So certainly interesting. I wonder what actually the lowest attendance rating, not like average attendance, but like building capacity has been for a team. When's the last time an NHL team was under 6,000 people? I have no idea. So the
Coyotes themselves last year averaged a shade over 11,000.
Right. But that's average attendance. I'm saying, like, when is the last time somebody actively played in a building that does not have a capacity over like 6,000 people? Like actively, like not for like a novelty game or like Hockey Town USA, like an actual. I mean, the closest building is maybe the MTS Center or Nassau Coliseum, which both were about 14 to 15,000, but even that is 3 times the size. So I'm not really sure. Kind of interesting. If anybody happens to know the answer, tweet us at Warminghouse Dan, and we would love to know the answer. Quite obviously.
Would it be the Cleveland Barons? Maybe.
I don't know. You were probably alive. I definitely wasn't. So
according to Caleb, most recently at the time of recording, apparently I was born before the turn of the 20th century. And granted, yes, I don't have my glasses on, Caleb, but even then I still can see that math is not correct.
That's bifocals to you, but anyway.
Yes.
Well, we're going to
make that for context. I don't think so.
I don't know.
You should check that.
Well, we're going to take this horse-drawn wagon away here, and we're gonna head on over to some
trying to go across the Oregon Trail, and we're somehow going to die of dysentery, but that's fine.
Well, we're going to go to the Red River Valley here in the state of North Dakota for our next NCHC preview. And welcome into episode number 128. Nick Maxon, if you're just transitioning with us from the last portion of the show, I think you really liked that transition. I think that was
you don't do those well often. That was spot on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I do know where the Red River Valley is. I mean, I do live in America's wasteland, as one would say. Speaking of America, though, Nick, before we get started for our second to last NCHC preview, of course, recording this on September 10th, of course, tomorrow, 9/11. So kind of in recognition of that, we've talked a little bit last year, I think, about where each of us was, but I think it's important, is there anything quick that you want to say in regards to, of course, a very somber time in American history, obviously, as we get ready for the excitement of hockey season, certainly taking a step back and taking a look at our country and the transitions that, they've gone through.
Yeah, remember that day very clearly. And for the record, I was only 14 years of age when this happened. Watched the second tower. I believe I've said this before in the podcast. Hit live as it was being covered on, I believe it was Good Morning America. We were watching this whole thing unfold as a freshman in high school. And at the time, very bizarre. No one really knew what was going on. I think initial reports was that it was a Cessna plane that hit the tower. And then obviously as more and more unfolded, second plane, now this is not an accident. This is an intentional thing. And then as you ground the aircraft across the country, which has never been done. Holy cow. The world changed for America. It changed in terms of its outlook. I think also for everybody that we aren't, insulated in a bubble, that we are vulnerable essentially to be attacked. And more so very hitting home for me as someone who had a parent and has a parent now still that works in the travel industry and as a flight attendant, right? This was scary. Especially for me. Yes.
And, I mean, I was 5, so I remember the second tower hitting as well because my mom had flipped on the TV. We were in the living room, and I remember that as well. Of course, both my parents were government employees before they retired. So there was obviously that extra added piece of that too. But I think it's interesting because it's an event that it will never happen again. And when I say that, I'm not necessarily referencing that things like that can't happen again, or that, like TSA obviously has changed and that sort of thing. But really, it was an age before social media. So like you mentioned, the reaction and the way that we were able to integrate information as a populace was so disconnected in a lot of areas that today it probably wouldn't, just because of how interconnected we are in terms of like networking and internet and things like that. So it was certainly a different time where, not to say the event itself couldn't happen again. You hope something like that never happens again. But I think like the coverage and the way that we would respond as a society would be much different now. And there have been some really good things that have come out of such a tragedy like 9/11 was. But obviously, time for remembering too.
100%. And a little couple of tidbits too. The news ticker effectively came from the coverage of 9/11. Number two, effectively also one thing that we will never see again is, and you probably don't remember this, Noah, but in airplanes, instead of your TV screen, it was essentially a collect phone with a credit card swipe. And that was how a couple of, of folks who attempted, most notably a Minnesota guy, tried to retake over for United 93. His famous last words, "Let's roll," were because he was able to make that phone call. You don't have those in aircraft anymore. So, a lot of things have changed for the good. From this, we've definitely learned. Again, TSA wasn't a thing before 9/11. Let's remember that. And, for obviously, I think, more importantly, obviously we still remember everybody, the first responders, obviously the victims in the towers, inside the Pentagon, inside the aircraft that lost their lives on that tragic day. But more so, I think that's got to be number one, is remembering the victims and the families that have been affected by it. But number two, to know that, America has been forever changed because of that. And that's number one.
Yeah, and certainly tried to move on and thrive and prosper since then. Speaking of thriving and prospering, Nick, as we get into our second to last NCHC preview, I want to say a thank you to our listeners and our viewers. Over 2,400 plays for the previews for the ones that we've done so far, and over 12,000 minutes watched on the YouTube channel as far as our previews are concerned. So really exciting for us to be supported by people as we go through and get ready for some college hockey action. So I just want to throw that out there. Thank you to our listeners as we get ready for what we would pick as the number one team in the NCHC for next season, the North Dakota Fighting Hawks, who of course last season played in a building that, speaking of capacity, Nick, I think is doing pretty well for itself. Ralph Engelstad Arena, 11,500 is the listed capacity. I think it can actually get to around 12,000 with standing room. And they have that party deck that's kind of up there too. Of course, Grand Forks, North Dakota. Head coach Brad Berry, his 8th season at the helm coming up. Of course, a 2002 UND graduate, former player as well. Assistant coach Dane Jackson, his 17th year behind the bench, a 1992 graduate, and someone who's been rumored for a long time to be headed to many other places and somehow stays put at the University of North Dakota as far as hockey is concerned. Carl Gehring, 4th season for him. Former UND player as well, 2-time All-American, also a national champion back in 2000, and back-to-back national championship games for him in 2000 and 2001 that he led that team to. And one of his teammates, Jason Ulmer, was a senior in 2000. He's the volunteer coach in his 4th year, 15-year pro career in the AHL, IHL, and UHL as well. So definitely have a lot of history players coming back to North Dakota, you can understand why the appeal, obviously, with the amenities and that sort of thing, the rich program history that they have.
Yes.
When you look at this coaching staff, I mean, Brad Berry has been a recipient of the NCHC Coach of the Year award numerous times. It's certainly been well-deserving. What do you like about this program as far as the organizational components here?
I think for Brad Berry, Noah, the one thing he doesn't get enough credit for is how well he recruits. It's easy to assimilate Ralph Engelstad Arena to be a main draw, and granted, it is. It's a big part of it. When you can play in front of almost 12,000 people night in, night out, and some very passionate hockey fans.
Right.
We'll leave it at that. But it's a gorgeous building. I mean, I hate to say it as as essentially as a rival, but I mean, as a player, if you have the opportunity to play in front of a building like that, you would.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, for recruits, it's not just the building, right? It's the coach, and Brad Berry is a heck of a coach, as noted, with multiple NCHC Coach of the Year awards. And I think that goes understated from him quite a bit, is that he's able to take, in the last couple of seasons, losing some star power. Let's go back a couple years, Jordan Kawaguchi. How about the Chaska kid? Why can't I think of a Washington Capitals system here? Oh my gosh, I can see him. I can see his face, but I can't get his name, and I'm going to get absolutely ridiculed for it. Anyway, but nonetheless, I mean, there's been so much talent that goes through, and you've got to be able to develop, and you got to be able to make them better, right? And he does that. He's, for what was the height, I think, of North Dakota hockey, again, the WCHA, when all the rivals they had, it kind of took a back seat a little bit. And obviously taking over for Dave Haxtell, he's put the program right back on the forefront. I don't think it ever really dropped that much, to be honest with you. But he's made them the perennial powerhouse that we are accustomed to. And I think it's, right to give credit at the top. Brad Berry, he's a great human being. Talked to him multiple times. Again, fantastic coach. You talk about his assistants, again, Dave Jackson, can't, miss him in terms of how his name has been around in terms of skill development specifically. I think he needs to get a credit where credit's due. And, just again, the entire organization, love them or hate them, they're a well-oiled machine, and they rightfully deserve the credit that they do get.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, by the way, Shane Gersich.
Thank you.
Is who you were thinking of.
Yes.
I was trying to think back. I was like, I've seen a lot of names putting these notes together. So I'm like, brain is pretty much fried here. But 39 games for this team last season, 24 conference, as always, 9 non-conference, 2 exhibition games for this team, 3 conference playoffs, and 1 NCAA tournament appearance game. Exhibition games, the opening win against Bemidji State, a 2-1 victory, and then lost 2-0 to the U.S. under-18 team around Christmas time. So those are the 2 exhibition contests. Technically finished, second out of 8 in the NCHC, really tied with Denver in that tiebreaker there. 53 points for them. 7th out of 59 in the pairwise for a .651 pairwise winning percentage. Overall, 24-14-1, a .628 winning percentage to go along with a .729 overall clip at 17-6-1 in the NCHC. So a pretty good season for them, all things considered. And kind of interesting, you look at Western Michigan, Denver, North Dakota, Duluth, St. Cloud, all of them cracking the top 10, top 10 or 11 when it comes to their particular seedings for the NCAA tournament last year. Just highly impressive. And Omaha was just outside of that bubble too. So very impressive from the conference last year. 14-6-1 at home at Ralph Engelstad Arena for this team last year. 10-5 on the road. 0-3 in neutral sites, unfortunately, and only 1-3-1 in overtime last year. So as we will allude to here, Nick, in fact, why don't we just jump right into it? This is a team that got worse as the game went along, which is a very weird North Dakota thing to say.
Usually the opposite.
Yeah.
Usually the opposite.
-8 in scoring in period number 3 and -2 in overtime, but they were +28 combined through the first 2 periods and +18 overall for this team. So just interesting. And it's reflected in the shot totals too. Plus 44 and plus 56 in periods 1 and 2, and then minus 25 and minus 6 in period 3 and overtime for a plus 69 shooting percentage. So, or differential, I should say, only plus 1.8 shots more per game for this team. So, and they were not a team, they were 13-6 when they outshot their opponent, 9-7 when they were outshot by their opponent, but they were 11-4 in 1-goal contests, Nick.
Yes.
So they were not outshooting their opponents, but they were finding ways to win hockey games. 13-3 after leading after 1, 23-2 when leading after period 2. Flip the script, Nick. 1-8-1 when trailing after period number 1, and 0-11-1 when trailing after period 2. They were 10-3 when they were tied after period 1, and then barely even got to a point where they were tied after period number 2. So it's interesting. When they scored first, 17-7-1. Opponent scores first, dead even at 500, 7-7. This is a team that did not average that many goals for more per game, did not heavily outshoot their opponents. They essentially finished atop the NCHC, Nick. You talked about Brad Berry. What is that a testament for him as far as a team that statistically didn't have those eye-popping numbers like the team they tied with in the Denver Pioneers?
And I think, speaking of eye-popping, they didn't really have that eye-popping offensive threat in the forward core. They really didn't have, that big weapon up front. I mean, all the attention was paid to Jake Sanderson, rightfully so. One of the best defensemen, if not the best defenseman all in college hockey, the past couple of seasons, just because of what he can do both on the defensive end as well as in the offensive end. And unfortunately for North Dakota, played with injuries, especially late in the season. I think North Dakota's fate would have been much different had he been in the lineup, especially come tournament time, and even in the NCHC tournament. I definitely believe that he would have been a big difference maker for them. But and a big reason why, we'll get to this, why we have got them number one, is the reinforcements up front are coming, and very good reinforcements. But that's really what it was. They kind of had to rely more on structure defensively. They had to be, a sort of a committee type team. And, for a team that's known for having big names up front, Jonathan Taves, Zach Parise, Jordan Kawaguchi more recently. Shane Gurchis was good a couple of years ago. Thank you for bringing his name, by the way. I can't believe I'm going to get scolded by North Dakota fans by not remembering him.
Well, to be fair, they're probably angry about something anyway. Let's be real.
That's true. But yeah, no, they just lacked that big name or two up front, and a big reason why that those numbers speak volumes is that when they were able to get ahead, it allowed them to play the game that they wanted to play. When they trailed, there just wasn't that one or two guys that you could rely on to kind of get them back, to kind of even the playing field per se. And that was a big, I think, detriment too, also for the NCAA foe. But this next year, I think, is going to be different. Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, certainly interesting. We'll get into obviously all of that. I know a lot of people were wondering why we had Denver at number 2, and there's some reasons for that. I assure you. I promise we will not leave you hanging, and I promise it's not just because it's our show and we'll do what we want. And the other thing too is that beyond that, it's like just because we have them ranked at number 1 doesn't mean that we don't believe in anybody else, and it also doesn't mean that you can't disagree with us. Like if you feel like that you
or
feel
that we're going to be right.
Yeah, exactly. Which doesn't happen very often if you follow the show closely. But that's the thing is like, if you believe Denver is going to be number 1 next season, stick to your guns, tell us why you feel it, and embrace it and enjoy the hockey season. That's what we're here to do too. So penalties per game, taking almost 2 penalties less than their opponent last year. So
that's one of Brad Berry's thing. Very disciplined.
Yeah, very disciplined team. 23.1% on the power play, 33 tucks last season. Penalty kill, about the same as Denver, 78.6% last season. Allowed 1 less goal at 33 power play goals allowed last year for them. So as far as their schedule was concerned, the only teams that they ended up sweeping last season, think about that, Nick, as far as more than one weekend series, I should say. Colorado College, all 6 games against them, and then Miami 4. And other than that, that was it.
Yep.
Interesting.
You don't see that from a North Dakota schedule looking back on the previous year often.
Yeah. Super interesting. Western Michigan, 3 victories against them. Duluth, also 3 victories against the Bulldogs. St. Cloud twice. Denver twice as well. Bemidji State twice. Niagara twice. Omaha as well with 2 victories against. And then the Minnesota Golden Gophers and Quinnipiac, each a single victory against them. this loss list looking a little bit bigger. Western Michigan, 2 losses against them, as well as Omaha, Cornell, and then single losses to the rest in this group: Duluth, St. Cloud, Bemidji, Minnesota, Quinnipiac, Penn State, the under 18 team, like I mentioned, and then of course Notre Dame, who ended up knocking them out in the tournament in the NCAAs. And then only one tie for them last season, which ended up being a shootout win against St. Cloud as well, too. So, this was a team that, like we talked about, kind of had that topsy-turvy affair. Again, Cornell was number 14 in the country at that time, or ended up in the season there, but they lost both games against Cornell. When they came out of that Christmas break, they just really lost traction. Whatever it was, they really struggled in the month of late December, January, moving into February, never maybe really found their footing. And then you talked about some injury issues as well, too. So before we get into the players, Nick, as you watch North Dakota go through the season, they didn't have that dominant uptick that we usually see from this team where they become more clutch as the year went on. But again, they finished tied atop the NCHC. Was there a little bit of resolve and a little bit of, kind of come to Jesus type thing with Bradbury and his group trying to find their identity last season?
I think towards the end, I think there was a little bit of look in the mirror and, just sort of admitting who they were as a hockey team, right? They knew that, there were some holes up front. They knew that, they were going to have to kind of play lock and key defensively and be more opportunistic offensively. I think that they did better at that as the season went along and as we got towards tournament time. And more so, they're still a fast hockey club. That's a team that can still outskate just about anybody in the NCAA. I think that they really truly held the form with that. And more so, they had to really also protect Zach Driscoll too. Zach Driscoll was, I think, much better as the season went along. He had some shaky starts, even including St. Cloud, an 8-2 throttling. The Huskies put him on at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, including the goal of the season, dare I say, with Yami Kranola and the Michigan play. Mind you, a play that, holy cow, went at full speed. Effectively, there wasn't really a stop, pick up, and pull. He kind of took it in stride and made the goal happen. Holy cow, that was probably more memorable than my broadcast career. But getting back off of the tangent train here, sorry about that.
Well, I'm trying to think. I was trying to think if Zach Driscoll was still in net. It was the 5th goal of the game, and I don't remember. Hellstad was the other.
I believe actually it was Hellstead and that. Now that you mention it, yes.
But maybe I'm wrong. I think it was the 5th goal of the night. So I'll definitely try to look at the box score as you continue on there. But by the way, Zach Driscoll actually had a better season than I think people gave him credit for.
Yes.
Actually, comparatively to Magnus Krona, almost identical. 23 games. 34 games played for him, 22-11-1, a 2.34 goals against, a 908 save percentage in just under 2,000 minutes. So
right, and as you look for that box score, that was actually the bigger question mark heading for North Dakota at the start of last season was how good could Zach Driscoll be? Again, former St. Cloud commit, bounced around a little bit, ended up with Bemidji, and then again as a grad transfer going to North Dakota after losing was it Peter Tomey. And then
Adam Scheel was,
and then Adam Scheel to Dallas, for on a pro contract. So that was the focus of North Dakota's, preseason ambitions or conversation as we went into the early parts of the season last year, and kind of weirdly enough, it was sort of a conversation, but I think what was buried and what really didn't get the attention I think it really deserved, at least outside North Dakota bubble, was the lack of offense, or at least you said the lack of the star power up front. We knew they were losing some players here and there. I think another underrated loss for them was Jasper Weatherby going to San Jose, that depth centerpiece, and just how good he was at both ends of the rink, and more importantly in the face-off dot. Jasper Weatherby to me was a bigger loss up front than maybe some of the other players. Certainly Kawaguchi, and I'm not taking anything away with some of their bigger, point getters, but I think Jasper Weatherby, just in terms of depth, was huge as a loss for North Dakota. So did you find it?
I did. Jacob Helston was actually in for almost 50 minutes of that game. Of course, Zach Driscoll got chased in the first 11 minutes, 3 straight goals.
Yeah, that's right.
Early on in that night. So, yes, he was chased. As far as players who came back the next night, of course, They ended up beating St. Cloud the next night there.
They did, yes.
Reese Gaber, who was a sophomore, paced the team in points. 37 points for him, 15 goals, 22 assists, just over a point per game clip, 7 power play goals for him last season.
It was money on the power play.
And a +8 rating. Everybody in this list has a plus category. Connor Ford up front, a senior last season, 37 games for him, 28 points, a .76 point per game clip, +2 on the season. Jake Schmaltz, freshman last year, played in every single contest, 24 points for him, a +7 rating to go along with 3 power play tucks. Ashton Calder, who is now headed to Penn State for his graduate transfer year, 34 games for him, 21 points, 2 power play goals, +3, as well as Matteo Constantini, who was a freshman last year.
Mateo, yep.
Yeah, same number of points with 21, but has a +12 rating last season. And then the only defenseman that I picked, because he was so good, some guy named Jake Sanderson, sophomore last season, 1.13 point per game clip over 23 games, had 26 total points and a +5 rating. Nick, if he had played every game for North Dakota last season, his pace would have been a 44-point pace.
Average. Right?
Pretty darn impressive.
Pretty good.
Yeah. This group is bringing a lot of players back. Of course, graduating players, like you mentioned, Zach Driscoll signed with Toledo in the ECHL. Connor Ford is headed to the Vegas Golden Knights.
Vegas, yep.
Yeah, the Henderson Silver Knights. Other players out, Ashton Calder, like we mentioned, Penn State. Jake Sanderson signing with the Ottawa Senators at the end of last season. Brendan Buddy headed to RPI, and goaltender Harrison Feeney, who would be a senior this season, is headed to Sweden playing overseas. Players coming in, though, Ryan Sidorsky, a graduate transfer from Union. Ty Farmer, also a grad transfer from UMass on the back end, defenseman who was very integral. I think a couple of years ago, St. Cloud State fans might know him
very well. Yeah, he had a heck of a run, was very instrumental in their national championship run, especially in Pittsburgh. No question about it.
Yeah, certainly. Goaltending was an issue addressed with Drew DeRitter from Michigan State for his 5th season. And then Mark Senden and Gavin Hain, as well as Chris Jandrick, are all staying for their graduate years. Chris Jandrick still on the list, was not announced for the, along with Senden and Gavin Hain, as far as players that were staying in the news release. And he was listed as a 5th-year player last year, but is on the roster as far as the roster was just updated about a week ago by them. So I'm going to assume it's current. And my guess being is COVID year that they lost at Fairbanks. The Canucks did not play a single season. So I'm wondering if he has extra eligibility. So Nick, this team last year, production-wise, obviously pretty decent. Is there any comments you want to have about guys moving, guys coming in, anything like that? Certainly, Drew DeRitter, I think, was maybe the big story goaltending-wise early to start off the summer for this team.
Huge. They needed to find some type of veteran presence in net. They get it with DeRitter coming over, like you mentioned, from Michigan State. But I think, I'm going to derail this conversation a slight bit, but Mark Senden coming back for a second-year captain, that's huge. Good kid, good player. He'll be a good voice and leader for that locker room. And then Gavin Hain, a good solid back, defenseman, right?
Forward.
He's a forward. Who am I thinking of?
Remember, Gavin Hain had that big goal against Denver a couple years ago in the NCHC playoffs. Was it Denver or Omaha? I think it was Denver. I can't remember. Where he went like far side, glove side high, just an absolute snipe. And as you mentioned, Mark Senden, of course, was named the captain again this season. Ethan Fritsch, Gavin Hain, Judd Caulfield, and Reese Gaber will also wear the alternates. Yeah, and Ethan Fritsch was the next most productive defenseman on the team with 15 points last season. So
that's probably, I think it was Ethan Fritsch. Yeah, he was. He can be lights out, especially in high pressure situations. He seems to have a knack for that. Ethan Fritsch in the back end there. So it's a good core. But as we will allude to here shortly, Noah, it's going to be the mixture. And a big reason why we like this team is the mixture of a solid veteran presence, which should be solid goaltending. Maybe not star power type, but enough, right? So as the Colorado Avalanche looks, you don't necessarily need to have a goaltender who steals you game, but just enough. But that mixture of young talent, again, Reese Gaber coming back is huge. But this core coming in, dare I say, yikes.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And it's one of the one of the smallest freshman crews actually coming in the NCHC this season. And that, high praise. All of them except for Caleb Johnson, who's a redshirt freshman, coming back here, all are draft picks in the National Hockey League. And one of the things that's interesting, like you mentioned, about why we picked this team number 1 overall, again, Denver just lost so much last season when it came to their high-end power. And North Dakota certainly, the loss of Ashton Calder is really going to hurt. He was the 5th most productive forward on this team last year, or 4th most productive, whatever it was. And but the other guys, like you mentioned, your Gavin Haynes, your Mark Sendens, all these guys that are coming back, some of the freshmen and sophomores last season who had really good years last year. That's the reason we really like this team, is that core that's coming back is really good. The additions with the transfer portal are certainly going to help them. And this freshman crew, oh my gosh, so good. So
yikes.
Six graduate players this season for them. 3 seniors, 5 juniors, 8 sophomores, 5 freshmen, if you count the redshirt freshmen, for a crew of 27, 4 forwards, and then that netminder in as far as the freshman group. So we actually get to talk about these guys quite a bit. Let's start with the goaltender. Let's start with Caleb Johnson, who was the redshirt 2001 from Grand Forks last year, 5'11", 182. I did chuckle at this. Caleb, we love you, but and we're talking about Caleb Johnson this time. Posted a staggering 37-1-2 record for Grand Forks Central over his high school career to help the Knights capture back-to-back state titles. For those of you who know North Dakota hockey and not taking anything away from Grand Forks Central, those East teams, especially Central and Red River, are just absolutely loaded. A lot of times they kind of run away with the tables a little bit, not taking anything away from them, but I'm guessing the team in front of him was probably pretty good. But nonetheless, did what he had to do. Spent the last 3 years with the Minnesota Wilderness before coming to North Dakota last year. 77 games for them, 32, 37, and 5. 278 goals against, 13 wins, and a 910 save percentage. So goaltending wise here, you have Drew DeRitter for a year, but if you're a guy like Caleb Johnson and you look at the net minding group here, what is the goal for Bradbury and these coaches getting paying attention to what's going to be the future in net for this team?
Well, again, I think, you mentioned it right off the bat is, I think there's no question it's DeRitter's net. But if you're looking at Caleb Johnson, look what happened last year with some games that maybe got out of hand with North Dakota. You're going to be called on. And dare I say it, injuries happen too, even with goaltenders. So you need a capable backup. And, for St. Cloud, for as much flack as, and not as much last season, but with David Rennick really taking a step in his development, we were spoiled with the backup situation that we had. And granted, during the playoffs, know that for Jackson Castor, he got, I think, a lot of undeserved flack. That's a tough situation for a goaltender, but it shows the importance of how ready you have to be as the next man up, especially in the goaltending realms, because it could be that exact situation. You need someone like in North Dakota, like a Caleb Johnson, to come in. Sometimes when it's not a name that's called upon as being the starter, either in middle of game or dare I say a playoff situation, you have to be able to come in, feel confident, and be able to play a very good hockey. Sometimes, again, when it's the most unopportune situation. So it's important for him to be able to develop, to learn from DeRitter, and to maybe even, dare I say, challenge for it again. And especially, they talked about it in our Husky goaltending situation, Noah, and that is they all three push each other. They all three support each other, because you just never know what could happen. He's going to have to take that same approach and to know that, hey, maybe he steals the net. Maybe he wins the job in training camp. That's what you want, is you want some goaltender competition, because it's always got to be the best man that's between the pipes, and especially in a tough conference with a very, very good top 4, possibly top 5. Maybe dare I say top 6 with Colorado College. Yeah. I can't count them out this year. I think, again, I go back to it. They're going to surprise people. That's going to be an important job here for North Dakota to try to stay atop of the NCHC. Yeah,
well, speaking of top end, how about the forward group here? The 4 freshman forwards. Geez, are these guys good? Holy smokes. And that's the thing. We talked about it with Cole Spicer decommitting from North Dakota. You could tell maybe how good this freshman group was going to be if he doesn't make the cut. Of course, being scooped up by the University of Minnesota Duluth. But forward side, Jackson Blake, the Eden Prairie native, 5'11", 165, right-handed, 2003. You have 3 2003s and then 1 2002. So couple of young guys too. They're not exactly hitting their year where they're supposed to be coming in necessarily, but they're just that ready. Last season, Chicago Steel in the USHL, 27 goals, 50 assists.
Boy.
77 points in 61 games, the USHL point total most by an incoming University of North Dakota player in over 2 decades. USHL third team All-Star selection and a 2021 fourth round selection by the Carolina Hurricanes at 109 overall. Is that good?
Well, yes. And dare I say, he has some help with some bloodlines, right? Jason Blake, we all know Jason Blake, former NHLer. So I guess the question is, can Jackson do a spinorama in the shootout? I mean, it wouldn't be illegal, but I mean, you could do it, right? This commitment has been lauded for more than just this offseason. His talent has been going all the way back to when he was playing in high school with Eden Prairie, of all places. Again, you talk about programs that have a history of development and producing not only college-ready NHL players, but also potential NHL talent. The Eden Prairie Eagles, again, west suburb of Minneapolis, no stranger to that. The North Dakota probably would have wanted them last year. Honestly, it would have been great, but they get them this year. And dare I say, small, as we mentioned, in terms of a class size, but my goodness, no shortage of talent, if not the best talent that we see coming in terms of raw skill in the NCHC. And Jackson Blake heads that class. And again, with his dad being a former NHL player himself, and I think also somewhere either a scout or in the development role, if I recall, or coaching somewhere. It's got a good person to talk with after games and to continue to improve beyond the walls of North Dakota.
Certainly. We'll wear number 9 next season. Number 21, Ben Strinden, who comes in from Fargo, North Dakota. 6'1", 196, right-handed shot. Good size for the 2002 forward. 2 seasons with Muskegon in the USHL. 25 goals, 31 assists, 56 points in 61 contests last season. And then also added 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points in 9 postseason games as well, too.
Yikes.
Assistant captain last season and was a 7th round selection this past year by Nashville at 210 overall. So someone that comes in with a little bit of size here, Nick.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that North Dakota wants to get back a little bit is the size factor. I mentioned Jasper Weatherby as that center and just how good he was. Part of what made him so good was he utilized his size for puck protection so well. I think he was either 6'2" or 6'3". Has been really good going into his pro career with San Jose. And I think this is sort of that same look as what North Dakota wants, is a guy that has that skill along with that size. He's going to be a big part of that. We'll have to, again, assimilate quickly. Again, USHL, very good to get players ready for the NCAA Division I level, so he should be good. But again, you mentioned that added size. North Dakota definitely looking to try to continue that next mold, and he should fit that very well.
Certainly. Number 22, Owen McLaughlin, Spring City, Pennsylvania native, 6'0", 156, left-handed 2003, a little bit undersized as far as the build, maybe in terms of just trying to bulk up a little bit. But here's the thing, Nick. Played on a line with the next guy on this list, Dylan James, at Sioux City. 28 goals, 44 assists, 72 points in 62 games, certainly can produce. Had 5 assists in 10 playoff appearances. So we talked about how good Jackson Blake was last season. Owen is only the 3rd incoming North Dakota player in the last 2 decades to register over 70 points in the USHL in a season. One of the other ones, Jackson Blake, that we just talked about. So you talk about how good this incoming freshman class really is. Also a 7th round selection, 206 overall by the Philadelphia Flyers. Oh, I feel bad for you, Owen, Chuck Fletcher. I don't know, man. But anyway, you certainly can put the puck in the net. And will be a very welcome addition to this North Dakota club.
This one is, I think, more the curious cases that we're going to see with North Dakota, because again, dare I say, that stature may be a problem for his assimilation to NCAA Division I. That under 160, granted, there could be some gamesmanship happening for us with North Dakota, on the website, because what. It's different, right? Because Cole Caulfield, and I'm bringing him into the mix because, we all thought that his size maybe, but he was still drafted in the 1st round. This is a 7th round pick, I believe. So not taking anything away from his skill set. He's a very talented player. Again, over 70 points in the USHL. That's you earn those. You don't just get those by accident. But you kind of wonder that, especially with the size and not necessarily the height, but more the weight. NCHC is heavy hockey. And you kind of wonder what that transition is going to look like for him. Now, obviously, there's skill set there, and there's no questioning or doubting his skill set. But you kind of wonder with the lack of size, does that hurt his development a little bit, or does that hurt maybe him and the ability to use his skill set in a way, or maybe does Brad Berry have a trick up his sleeve where he pairs him maybe with some bigger players and he is sort of, that F2, F3 that is going to find open space and, just has a cannon of a shot. We'll have to see, but that one we'll have to watch and see on how his development goes, because I think that one has a little bit more flexibility with how he can translate, especially in his first year from USHL to NCAA Division I.
Yeah, certainly 19 years of age. And the other thing that you kind of wonder, though, is that, is he someone that, he might be undersized, or maybe he's just someone who is actually a very nimble skater, but just has a couple more inches of height onto him. And maybe his game is someone who is maybe more akin to someone who kind of floats between the seams and is able to find those quiet areas of the ice, too. So you kind of wonder, obviously 72 points in 62 games is very good, but there's something that North Dakota sees here that goes beyond the height and weight too. So
well, and 6 foot, the frame is there, right? Yep. So the for him to be able to build onto his frame, he obviously hasn't grown into it yet. There's no question that this is a very temporary sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a concern, but a temporary sort of, thing that you can be addressed. And granted, that weight figure, as we mentioned before, may not be the most accurate. There could be some, like I said, maybe some gamesmanship happening.
And it may be a note that they have for the middle of the summer, and he's been training with guys at North Dakota, and he's going to put on 15 pounds,
and what's to say it is accurate. He's going to probably put on 15 to maybe 20 pounds, over the next 12 months. And so you take 156, he's already now up to 180. It's probably a non-factor by the, even maybe the middle of the season. So like you said, enough talent is there, and North Dakota likes what they see. So probably a small factor at the end of the day, but still something to watch.
So you said 6'0", 180, huh?
By the end of next year.
Well, let me tell you something, Nick. The 2003 Dylan James from Calgary, Alberta, he's 6'0", 180.
How about that?
Look at that. Spent last season with Sioux City as well. Of course, teammates last year. The Clark Cup champions last year, by the way, in case I was remiss to mention that. 61 points, 28 goals, 33 apples, and 62 contests with the team last season. USHL's Rookie of the Year. And the league's all-rookie team, obviously. First rookie to eclipse the 60-point mark in USHL play in over 6 years, and became the first UND commit to win Rookie of the Year award since Brandon Bochenski back in 2001. How about that? Yeah.
Brandon Bochenski, you mean the long-lost line mate of Zach Parise?
Yeah, how about that, huh? 5 goals, 3 assists, and 10 playoff contests. Is a second-round selection at number 40 by who else? Stevie Y and the Detroit Red Wings. So you talk about respect, when you're drafted second round, 40th overall, my goodness. And again, AJHL product, Oktok Oilers, huh? Yeah.
We talked about this in the last couple of episodes of how they are somehow developing some really top end offensive talent. And this guy is another one of those, holy cow. So here's one thing that I want to point out is, his listed major is kinesiology. Yeah. That's scary because we talk about height, we talk about weight, we talk about skill. The one thing that we maybe don't talk enough about is the hockey IQ part of it. My guess is if you're majoring in kinesiology, you're probably a smart dude, which means you're probably your hockey IQ. And a big reason I know with Stevie Y, he drafts players that have high hockey IQs. There's no question about that. This is a guy I'm going to be watching just as closely as Jackson Blake, not just maybe because of his raw skill, but just maybe how he sees the ice, how he plays in certain situations. Just the overall hockey intelligence is going to be high with this young player. No question. He was drafted in the second round. Big part of that.
Yeah, certainly. And, the piece that's kind of interesting, too, with kinesiology is you also are someone who has a really good understanding of how your body works and able to, manipulate those mechanics, so to speak. By the way, other majors, Owen McLaughlin and Ben Straden will both be investment majors, and Jackson Blake is general studies, as is Caleb Johnson. So, talk about a couple of really good
hockey studies, basically.
Yeah. So
nothing wrong with that. I'll tell you that.
Well, talk about some really good investments, so to speak, by the North Dakota Fighting Hawks as they get ready for for next season. Of course, October 1st, exhibition game. Good to see Manitoba back on the docket for them again. You know, it was kind of with the COVID pieces a couple of years ago. October 7th and 8th versus Holy Cross. They've had a couple of good games in that building at Ralph Engelstad. October 15th and 16th versus Quinnipiac. And I don't know who wrote this schedule for North Dakota, Nick, but this is probably the best schedule that I have seen in the NCHC, by the way. So they're at home for their first 5 games. Then they travel October 21st and 22nd to Minnesota.
That's great. That's homecoming, I believe, for the Gophers, if I recall correctly, too.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun for that. And then October 29th versus Arizona State. They're in Vegas at the Hockey Hall of Fame game.
Yes. Awesome. In Vegas, too. That's going to be killer. And though we give them crap, too, honestly, but how great would it, how great that, the Hawks fans travel to see that many college hockey fans. There's no question they've traveled to Nashville in droves. We saw them out in Pittsburgh when their team wasn't even there. And they'll travel to Vegas well.
And I think that's the thing is everyone goes, oh, why are they always in the Hockey Hall of Fame game? Why are they always in this? Well, that's precisely the reason.
That's exactly the reason.
One, they're a good hockey team, and 2, you're going to get a good crowd. So, and ASU should bring a pretty good boat too, I think.
Yes, just down the road by about 4.5-5 hours or so.
Yeah, November 4th and 5th, they travel to Omaha before coming home the next weekend against Denver, and then at home again versus Miami. Then they're in Bemidji, and then at home November 25th and 26th, Friday, Saturday for them. Traveling to St. Cloud December 2nd and 3rd, and then traveling to Western Michigan to round out the first half of their schedule. Second half, the U.S. Under-18 team visits on December 31st. Then the 6th and 7th, they're at home against Lindenwood before the following weekend at home again versus Western Michigan. And then they're at home again versus the Duluth Bulldogs. Then they travel to Miami and then have a week off before traveling to Denver, then at home against St. Cloud, traveling to Colorado College, and finishing at home against Omaha. That's actually a pretty good schedule. That's very nicely spaced out. A lot of really good home stretches. Not too bad in the road swing of things, too. So I think North Dakota certainly has a very favorable schedule as they head in. Only fan question we got here for this team, by the way, Nick.
Oh, geez, you don't say. We didn't have like a pile in the mailbag today?
Yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. I hope he gets up next week for St. Cloud. One would hope. But
we'll see.
But anyway, maybe people just don't like North Dakota. It's fine. So Derek Felska, of course, asks, could the Fighting Hawks be an elite college hockey program without recruiting Minnesota-born players? My initial answer would be, number 1, they have a lot of North Dakota players. And number 2,
they have some Minnesota players on there that are very good, like Jackson Blake.
Yeah. Well, he said without recruiting them. Could they still be good?
Yes.
I would think so. I mean, here's the thing. Like, Nick, if and this is no offense to St. Cloud fans, but if you walk into the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center and then you walk into Ralph Engelstad Arena, where are you going?
And that was your only recruiting tool, right? Without talking to any coaches or anything. Yeah. If you're basing off the arena, come on, it's good. Yeah. It's nice. Well, let's say this, right? And let's actually approach Derek's question. Derek's question is flawed for 2 reasons. That means you're only assuming that the best players are available are coming out of Minnesota. If there's one thing we started to notice, and this is great for the game of hockey, is that there are other states and there are other developmental avenues. I mean, Austin Matthews and Logan Cooley have come out of Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, you mentioned the AJHL too.
AJHL.
How many players are coming from Canada now?
So there's 2 things that are happening. One, the coaching staffs are finding other avenues because, again, everybody knows. In fact, was it John Butchergross? All but one program in college hockey has someone from Minnesota on it. Yeah. So let's say this. I mean, we have 57 boats on the same water recruiting, right? So it's already a saturated recruiting zone. We all know that, right? So you have to. The end of the day is you have to find other avenues to recruit top end players. So if you didn't, you still would be a good program because you have the history, you have the coaching staff, you have already good talent on your roster. So you have essentially a form that attracts players from out of state, right? And dare I say, to their probably what would be their biggest rival starting next season. How about the Gophers? And holy hell, their recruiting class and a lot of their players are coming not from the state of Minnesota. Yes, a few, but their hometowns are Pennsylvania, from outside of Minnesota. I mean, come on. So you have to be able to find those diamonds in the rough. And that's kudos to the program that you've built, the legacy, and, you know, the different players that you have that are the word of mouth, right? I think you would know this better than I do, Noah. And that is when you're a player on a team and you get recruited into a very high profile program, right? Yes, the player itself is going to do their own due diligence, but a lot of the times what often sells a player on a program is, you know, they're reaching out to some of the players that are already on that program and they're getting, you know, their own feedback from it is, this team's already really good, but now I'm a fairly talented young guy. I want to go win a national championship. I want to go here. Am I not onto something there?
Yeah, definitely. You know, what's interesting, Nick, I was just counting, and let me see if my math is correct here. It probably isn't because I'm trying to do this very quickly. I believe there are 6 guys on this North Dakota roster from North Dakota, and it's 5, maybe 6 if I missed one, from Minnesota.
That's it.
So, you know, there's your answer right there. A lot of guys coming from out east too, Ontario, New York, guys coming from Alberta, British Columbia as well, a guy from Missouri, Texas, Manitoba. I mean, you have more Canadians than North Dakotans or Minnesotans, first of all. You know, so I think you kind of answering your own question a little bit.
And let's actually have a graphic pulled up from Bucci Grass when he said that. So, yes, 58 of 64 Minnesota NCHC played high school hockey, number 1. So, and then in the NCAA ranks, you have 49 of 59 NCAA Division I men's teams have at least one Minnesota player on it. That's nuts. So it goes to say that, again, everybody's trying to pull the town from here, which means you have to look outside. You mentioned the Canadians out east, and, you know, was it behind this? Is it Michigan? I believe is the number 2 in terms of state.
It's like Michigan and then Massachusetts, I think.
And so you have to be able to get creative because, and again, you have to know that the best talent ever, you know, there's going to be the bigger programs pushing for it. So you have to do it. So there's your answer, Derek.
There's your answer. This next one kind of made me laugh too. Is Brad Berry on the hot seat in Grand Forks?
How the hell would be?
Yeah. How do you tie for first in the NCHC and bring this team to a national championship?
Also winning Coach of the Year award more than once. He's the only coach actually to ever win it more than once in the NCHC history.
So for those playing the home game, no. Last one. I like this one though. Does Grand Forks have anything as good as Val's or House of Pizza? Well, it depends on House of Pizza. I think a lot of people kind of depend on that, but
supposedly you go first. I have a couple of tidbits on that.
Yeah,
too.
I would say in terms of like something, I mean, House of Pizza and Val's makes me think of something a little bit more greasier, a little bit more kind of like with character like that. With that, I would say maybe like Italian Moon. I know a lot of people, you know, are kind of hit or miss on that one, but I think that one has some character as far as it's kind of like, I don't know, like the North Dakota version of a pizza ranch with a little bit of flair kind of thing. But like it's its own unique little homemade
like Applebee's kind of thing.
Yeah. As far as places to go, and technically this is not in Grand Forks. Technically it's actually East Grand, but the Blue Moose.
I mean, the Blue Moose have been. That's good.
I mean, you can't. How do you discount that? I mean, it's just.
There was another place. And I'm trying to remember, it was a wing place and it had kind of like a, say like an island vibe to it. It was South Parrot Cays, I believe. It was. Yes. That has really rock solid dry rub wings. Apparently that's a big thing in Grand Forks is the wings thing. Someone please correct me. I'm probably terribly wrong, but I remember stopping into Parrots Cay and had some Jamaican dry rums and they were freaking fantastic. So
I remember that they used to have that Green Mill. I don't know if it's still there. They had one for the longest time in Grand Forks. That was kind of a hot spot, I know, for people too. But I mean, there's a lot of good places in Grand Forks. Grand Forks is definitely a college town. It's definitely a bit of a party
100%.
town. So you can find some really good eatery places. So is there anything as good as Val's? Val's is pretty good. I mean, Val's is its own.
As far as a burger joint that isn't a chain, I don't think so.
I don't know that you beat it in Grand Forks, but as far as things better than House of Pizza, I think you have a lot of options, unfortunately, for those who like House of Pizza. Although Boulder Tap House in St. Cloud would be another one that I would say is very underrated. It's not a local thing per se, but Boulder Tap House I think is really good. If you're ever in the St. Cloud area as well too, a lot of good places actually in the Granite City as well too. But Nick, let's kind of talk about this a little bit before we get into our final questions here. Why did we pick this team at number 1 here? And more specifically, why did Noah Grant convince Nick Maxon to pick this team at number 1? Because again, you were kind of a little bit more like, hey, there's an argument to be made for Denver, and you're not wrong. Denver, very good team. In my eyes, I think Denver lost a little bit more than North Dakota. That core coming back is pretty good. This freshman group is hard to deny. And I think for the Fighting Hawks, as long as the goaltending can match a guy like Magnus Corona out there in Denver, I think they're going to be just fine.
Agreed. Again, we went back and forth on this one quite a bit. And as we said this before, it's not like we don't look at this as a 1-2, almost like a 1A, 1B. Honestly, at the top of the NCO, there's
1A, 6A,
right, exactly. But yeah, it's that mixture of young, really high end offensive talent that they haven't had, especially last season, right? And you could argue maybe the last 2. Goaltending, again, you have a veteran presence coming in from Michigan State. You're not going to have as explosive on the back end, but I think what that's going to make North Dakota do is be a little bit, dare I say, more responsible in the defensive end and maybe not quite as run amok. One thing that I think it's going to allow them to do as well is let's go back to Tyler Clevin. I think Tyler Clevin actually has a little bit more of the same skill set as Jake Sanderson does than people think. I think that they sort of, because they paired them together for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, and the big knock on Clevin, that of course the one that I had last year, he was highly penalized last season.
Yes,
a
little bit, and just because I think they wanted Jake Sanderson to feel that he could be himself. I think you're going to see a lot more offense from Tyler Clevin this year to kind of be, I mean, he's not going to be the same caliber, but I think he's going to surprise some people with some of the offensive drive or the way that he'll, I think, carry the puck into the zone, the way he'll walk the blue. And I think he's going to be a little bit more unleashed offensively because I think that's going to be the one area that they're going to want to try to replace is that offense from the blue line. If there's one small thing you can knack North Dakota on as far as what they are going to have a hard time replacing, it's going to be offense from the blue line. And again, from Brad Berry's system, a lot of times that fourth, if not that fifth defenseman, they were high in on the forecheck. I mean, they were not up on the blue and they were at top of the circle. Sometimes, dare I say, the hash marks really suffocating a big part of their offensive forecheck. So that's going to be their biggest knack. But as far as talent concerns, this mixture of veteran and young talent coming back together with solid goaltending is a big reason why we have them at number 1.
Yeah, certainly. So speaking of facing the number 1s, if you're North Dakota, how the heck do you stay atop the NCHC standings? And if you're St. Cloud State, of course, St. Cloud matching up December 2nd and 3rd in St. Cloud, and then traveling back home February 17th and 18th to Grand Forks to face the Huskies.
Yep.
How February?
Sorry.
Yeah, months.
Right.
How in the world?
It's cold either way.
How in the world do the Huskies really, especially vindicate their demons in Grand Forks a little bit?
That's tough because by then, Brad Berry, if this team gels together like we think they will, that's going to be a tough task at hand. There's no question about it. I think if anything, you try to test a little bit of North Dakota by trying to play below the goal lines. If anything, there's still some size there, but this is where like a Micah Miller returning for St. Cloud really can help you. And I think if anything, if you can try to maybe exploit some of that undersize, what we think is going to be some guys undersized in North Dakota's forward group, and then trying to exploit what could be some not as much mobility from their back end. I think that's how you do it, but you do it by grinding them out. I just think that's how you kind of beat them on the boards, especially below the goal line. And for North Dakota, I think how you counter that is, assimilate the young guns and the veterans as quickly as you can. And number 2, try to, again, rely on that speed, and that transition game is going to be really important. I think, again, with Jake Sanderson not being there, you don't have that one defenseman who can essentially grab the puck and just wheel it and skate it out himself. You're going to have forwards supporting D, and again, quick 5-foot passes. You're going to have everybody involved in for quick transitions in and out. especially and don't be afraid to go dump the puck and go get it again. I know North Dakota likes to carry possession in on the forecheck if they can. I know they like that possession game and to carry puck in on the rush, but you may not have that right away. But you may be able to develop that later in the season. But early on, don't be afraid to dump it in and get bodies to the puck and be the first one on touches.
I think if you're North Dakota too, one of the things they do really well and have done historically is when they do enter the zone with possession, they do it in layers, right? They're willing to threaten the middle. Yep. They're really not afraid to threaten the middle of the ice and create some sort of crossing pattern where the initial puck carrier is able to shoot the puck, or he's dropping it to the player who's behind, ready for a drop pass. Like really good in terms of filtering plays towards the middle of the ice in the offensive zone. And that's what makes them so dangerous. They're a really good attack on the rush team. As much as you talked about establishing that forecheck, a lot of times, like you mentioned, their first goal is to essentially carry the puck in, and when they do it well, it's a very effective tool that we had talked about too. And
you talk about layers, right? And one of the things that for the young, like higher skilled, highly touted it's the patience to create those layers, right? And that is not to essentially come in as a one line across the blue line. It's, again, that center lane drive, and then maybe a little bit of delay for that person on the wing side carrying that puck. And then finally in not only that third forward, but this is where Jake Sanderson really made his money, is then almost that fourth guy coming in to kind of clean up, where you have two guys coming down that center lane, they're going to draw attention themselves. But that fourth guy coming in the zone, oftentimes it was Sanderson or Clevin. They're the guys that actually have the wide open, and then you're going to have a good 10 feet to skate in too. So it's that patience also on the rush to develop those lanes and those passing lanes as well.
Yeah, that's kind of a characteristic. And of course, I had a good conversation with David Hoff, who of course is the head coach of the U.S. sled hockey team and knows Brad Berry very well. And the real emphasis a couple of years ago on running that, what is called a flat drop pass, where you're isolating one side of the ice and you're waiting for that weak side defenseman or the trailing forward, I guess, if you're F3, to kind of be an available option as second flow essentially on the weak side. So that's something that North Dakota does very, very well with their zone entries, and really not a team they're not afraid to spread the game out east-west. I know as much as we want to talk about how teams, you want to go north-south, that's the main goal. They're not afraid to spread the rink out in all directions. So I think that's very impressive for them. If you're St. Cloud, like you mentioned, pucks in deep, I think just getting this team to turn their feet, keeping them on their heels. Even if you have to dump pucks in, are you forcing them to turn their feet? Something that Duluth a couple of years ago on that 5 OT game before they ended up getting the job done did really well, is forcing defenders to turn their feet and try to alleviate pressure a little bit. And I think one of the big crutches for St. Cloud, especially in Grand Forks, is they allow the middle to be open way too easily. Be comfortable letting this team play on the perimeter. Let them do what they want outside the dots, below the goal lines, on the perimeter towards the blue line. Let them do that. Just do not give them a chance in the middle of the ice, because they like to run bumper plays when they've established zone time, where they're kicking a play to the middle, all of a sudden, boom, it's a quick strike opportunity or a rebound that's juicy that someone's going to pot home. So
yeah, and to just build on that a little bit, when I was calling in essentially the spotlight well for KVSC radio a couple of years back, finals of Jack and Nick Paling, one goal losses for the most part, and a big part of that was North Dakota's forecheck was suffocating. But again, and where North Dakota gets you is they almost get you to almost panic in your structure, right? Where it's okay, yep, we're on the perimeter, and yes, they can play that low to high game, and they've got some talented defensemen, and they did at that point to get pucks through. We're talking Jacob Bernard Docker at the time too, was really good at doing that. But like you said, feel comfortable, almost be like the Minnesota Wild of 2003, where as long as you're protecting the middle of the ice and you allow them, if anything, get in the shooting lanes, get blocks in there, but don't go chasing them, because once you do that, again, that opens up that east-west lanes in the middle of the ice, and especially in the slots, and that's where they capitalize, is when you go chasing too much in your defensive zone and get out of your structure.
Certainly agree. Of course, wishing North Dakota the best of luck in their NCHC endeavors, except, of course, against our St. Cloud State Huskies, who will be the next ones on the docket as we get ready for a Sunday release next weekend. Our final NCHC preview, already crazy. It's gone fast, certainly. So with that being said, we are also going to wrap up the Women's World Championships here in our Extra Ice session. And welcome into the Extra Ice Session, episode 128. Nick Maxon, along with myself, Noah Grant here. Nick, a quick little recap here. The Women's World Championships wrapping up. We were excited for the medal round in the final couple days here. Current and former St. Cloud State players, like we mentioned, you need a Newland for Finland. 7 games for her, no points and a -6 rating. The Finns did not have the best tournament, unfortunately.
No, they did not.
Laura Zimmerman, the Swiss forward, 4 games for her, 2 points and a -1 rating, had 2 assists. I don't think she played in the last couple of games, so I don't know if she fell out of favor a little bit towards the end of the tournament, but certainly something to keep an eye on. Laura Kluge for Germany had 4 points in 4 games, was -1. Pretty good little tournament for her. And then Klara Himlerova finishing 25th in tournament scoring, 5 points in 7 games, 4 goals with an apple as well, a +2 rating, and a 23.53 shooting percentage for her. So pretty good little tournament for her, all things considered. For those of you who missed it, when we last left off, we were getting ready essentially for the preliminary rounds and then the medal rounds. To essentially decide who would play in the bronze medal game, who would play in the gold medal game.
Did I call it? I think I did.
We got our answer here. I'm going to ignore what you said. Anyway,
like normal.
Well, what can we say? Actually, the more curious case was actually sitting in the rounds, the consolation rounds. Actually, the Finns beat Hungary by a score of 3-2 in overtime, and then Japan beat Sweden by a score of 5-4, and then Japan actually beat Finland 1-0. To claim that 5th place spot and stay in Group A for next year. So they will make the medal round regardless in the next World Championship. On the other side, the medal round side, the U.S. beat the Czechs by a score of 10-1, Canada beating the Swiss 8-1, and the Czechs beat the Swiss for the bronze medal by a score of 4-2. So Laura Kluge, congratulations to her, ending up with a bronze medal. And unfortunately, Laura Zimmerman was the team that they ended up beating for the Swiss in that one. And then Canada beating the United States 2-1 for gold. Brianne Jenner had both Canada goals. Abby Rock scored for the United States in that contest. Final rankings are Canada 1, US 2, Czechia, Switzerland, and Japan round out Group A the next time in the top 5. The Finns, Sweden, Hungary, and Germany round out the top 9, and then the host team Denmark was 10th, so they will be in the relegation round moving into next year. So, Nick, I guess very quickly, I mean, we've seen it akin where whoever seems to win in that preliminary round doesn't get the job done in the medal round. I want to know your thoughts on the game. And Abby Rock actually had a comment about it too, and said that it felt like Canada, essentially, she kind of called them a bunch of divers, essentially, in the way that they played. Is there anything to that? And really, are we surprised that Canada, who was a decently oiled machine, but was not as good as they were 12 months ago, kind of slowly found their footing and got the job done when the time was needed?
Well, we talked about it last week and how I thought that, their offensive might wasn't quite where we normally see them.
Yeah.
But defensively, they were still very good. And my concern was exactly that. And dare I say, it hit the nail right on the head, which was the United States were getting the job done relatively easy, and that does not normally historically bode well in the medal round. And dare I say it did. And here's the thing. There is something to where they're saying they're a bunch of divers, not because we can control the referees, but more so it's the game within the game, right? It's sort of messed with their heads a little bit. And at the end of the day, if you feel like you're not getting the calls, if you feel like the game isn't going your way, you can't get to your game. It sort of looked like that. That all adds up to, well, not a gold medal. And so unfortunately for the U.S., is it an excuse on the surface though? Yeah. But it affected them in the way that they were able to execute their game plan when it mattered most. And unfortunately, it cost them. And I shouldn't, it's still very good to get a silver medal, but no question this U.S. team had hopes and certainly had the roster to compete for a gold. And granted, it's a 1-goal game, 2-1, but definitely disappointing from the way that the preliminary round and dare I say even the game before that, how things were trending, not the finish they wanted for sure.
Yeah, kind of interesting here. The U.S. had one less power play, or one more penalty, I should say, than Canada did in the game. So the disparity wasn't huge.
No.
But and then of course
it's just the mental game, right?
It really is. And then of course Marie-Philippe Poulin, of course, shot block at the end of that game. What do you expect? I mean, just a gamer
again. Yeah.
She's
insane. she's absolutely insane. Insanely
Yes.
good.
So, whatever you want to say, Canada came together at the right time. U.S. had a great tournament, though. I mean, you lose.
They did, yes.
You lose by 1 goal to a very good Canada team who found their footing at the right time. Congratulations to the Canadians. Well fought, well deserved, I think. And the U.S., nothing to really hang their heads on. I think they wanted a little bit more knowing how successful they were through the tournament, but it was the matchup of the big dogs. And, the U.S., I would say arguably was probably the better team in the tournament. But that's why you play the game. 60 minutes of hockey and final score 2-1. So,
yep.
Unfortunately, after the game was probably the worst part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith was the one who ended up handing out
the medals.
Yeah, flying into Denmark. I mean, what a major middle finger to the game of hockey, especially for Canada. And really, the Canadian women had released a statement before the tournament talking about how they wanted to represent Canada as a country, but they didn't want to wear the Hockey Canada sweater, so to speak, or the emblem.
Yes.
And I think that speaks volumes. So to have the very guy that's at the head of that and the principal point of what this is all about. And I think it's interesting because, it was very tone deaf, quite obviously.
Very, yes.
But you have, this group of women who really kind of want to just do their own thing. And really, I feel like if you're Hockey Canada, you want to stay out of the limelight while you can. You want, things have kind of died down a little bit for the time being till we get some more clarity on the next things. Why open yourself up to that? And number two, it's almost, as the Steve Dangle podcast alluded to, almost defiant the way that Hockey Canada was like, this is what a CEO does. We can validate and justify why this decision was made. Like bullshit, dude. Like it's bad.
Yeah, it is. And it's almost like because mind you, Hockey Canada is a governmental, supported body too, which is weird.
Which we have some more info on that. But, the question is, why do you not pick somebody like Haley Wickenheiser or somebody who is,
right. It just speaks to, like you just mentioned, perfectly tone deaf, right? And because it wasn't Hockey Canada just prior to that. Was it the CEO, wasn't he sort of backed by legislation, or it was claiming that there was some argument that they were making that, I'm supported by the legislators that are in control of this. So was it in his mind, granted, albeit wrong, to carry that sort of, like, dare I say, a sense of ego to why he handed that out? Like I said, it was a giant middle finger. It's the wrong move, 100%.
And it's like, what would have been a better move? It's like, it's not that he doesn't have to say or do anything. It's like, imagine you send Haley Wickenheiser to Denmark. Canada wins the gold medal. She hands out the medals in Hockey Canada. Even if it's from him, says Hockey Canada is very proud of our women. And a big special thanks to Haley Wickenheiser for handing the medals. Well deserved. Hockey Canada wishes the women's team the best moving forward. Like, the end,
here's right. So here's the probably the antithesis of that. So Hockey Canada, where you're just validated somewhat, with some of the conversations from that previous week, and then you send anybody but the CEO to hand out the medals. Is that sort of an admission of guilt? Or I'm just trying to think about,
right,
from their standpoint, granted, albeit not correct, but you kind of wonder if that there's no way they didn't think about that. It's kind of how I see it. And is it doubling down in a sense? Yes, it is. It's doubling down again. It's throwing the bird at the women's hockey players in that moment. But you kind of wonder if all they were looking for was that sense of validation, which they then got, which means, well, then it's just business as usual. To me, that's kind of, in my best guess, the way that maybe they approached it. Definitely from my standpoint, not the way it should have been done, but that's my guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, the nice thing is, Nick, it's not the only bit of Hockey Canada news we have, actually.
Oh, is that so?
Interesting. Saw this today from the Toronto Sun, which take that with a grain of salt, which you will. But
yes.
From 2010 to 2017, Hockey Canada actually owned a condominium in Toronto. And it was purchased, they believe the price was probably around $500,000 that it was purchased. And
which actually is cheap in Toronto, let's be real.
Yeah. Unit was purchased in 2010. And Hockey Canada said, this is their direct quote or their reasoning, was purchased in 2010 to alleviate costs associated with staff and directors traveling to Toronto, including for the 2015 and 2017 IIHF World Junior Championships. It was sold in 2017. However, Multiple post-media sources in the position know that circa 2009-10, around where this purchase would have been made, in interviews did not list the coming 2015 or 2017 World Junior Championships as an express reason they ever heard for the purchase. And indeed, it was not until June of 2013, 3 years after the condo was purchased, that Toronto and Montreal were even announced as co-hosts of those tournaments. And the other argument was, another executive said, well, it would be a place that, executives would use for stopovers and what have you, for meetings and that sort of thing, which, not to say that wouldn't be legit, but however, board governance experts said Hockey Canada's condo ownership wouldn't make financial sense because the board only met 4 to 5 times per year. So you're essentially using, as a non-for-profit organization, whatever profit you're making, essentially to buy a place in Toronto to do whatever the hell you want to do, and that is not in the best interest of the public and that funds you to do this. I mean, is that tone deaf 2.0 here?
More like 3.0, but and here's something to consider though. The World Junior Championships, it's sort of like, dare I say, the NCAA Frozen Four sites. It's like, although they're not announced, they're the worst kept secrets as well. Yeah. Now, I'm not excusing that because I really truly feel like they probably did know, but that's not the argument, right? The argument is, if you're going to be purchasing high price real estate, $500,000 is still $500,000, right? It's not hotel fees. And
you mentioned, even if you're using it for the World Juniors, I mean, I don't know how big it was, but it's an apartment. How many people can you fit into an apartment, even for a World Junior Championship?
You're not saving money on hotel bills, regardless of that. Now, if you're talking, hey, real estate investment, and we purchased it in 2009 for this, but now we sold it for this, and we actually made money from it, that's different. But they didn't mention that.
Yeah.
They didn't mention that.
And it's interesting, they said, and they don't know what the sale price was. They were thinking it was probably somewhere between $600,000 to $800,000. But again,
not that much.
Right. But again, they talked about the piece. It's like, did the cost of maintaining it and having it year after year, is that alleviated by that? And moreover, again, we talked about the principle of the thing. What's the justification for it?
Right. Especially for the amount of times you use it.
Yeah. Why does Hockey Canada need an apartment? And it's one thing if you say, oh, well, we rented this meeting room 3 times a year on the high rise of this building that overlooks Toronto. It's like, if you want to have a little bit of glitz and glamour to impress some people when Hockey Canada brings them in, I get that, but it's like, what is and the thing is, I hate to say it, and again, no evidence of this, but with everything that's gone on as far as sexual allegations related to that, the organization that's under fire for this, having a private apartment for its executives, is not a good look on top of that, because you don't know what's going on there. And here's the thing. If you have an apartment that is theoretically owned by this organization and something bad happens, even if it's not of Hockey Canada's accord, if it's just one of the executives or something that does something, who does that fall on?
Yeah. It's weird, right? Because, and again, I think we need to remind our listeners too, if this is a private business, this is not a huge deal.
Yeah.
The fact that Hockey Canada literally gets subsidized funds from the Canadian government, so their spending is watched more closely. It'd be no different than, it's slightly different if USA Hockey, you're still asking the same questions. It's more like, well, it's funds that we raise. It's funds that are not, given by essentially taxpayers. So it's a slightly different argument, but still the same argument applies. Well, what's the need for this, right? But the fact you're taking taxpayer money and then still using that for these types of purchases and proceeds on top of everything else that seems to be mismanaged and misoperated, it's like, it just continues to show that the leadership that we just talked about was sent out under effectively their own arrogance and ego to handle gold medals. These are the same persons that are misallocating taxpayer dollars and not, running a public entity correctly when they're spending $500,000 on a place they don't need to.
And it's
that's just the
interesting.
purchase price, like you said.
And it's interesting. Some reports said Scott Smith was actually the direct one who advocated for the purchase, and others say they don't. So I don't know how true that is. But again, we don't know the
sell. It's under his leadership, right?
We don't know the sell point either. Like I said, $500,000. They could have sold it for $300,000 and lost money too. I have no idea.
Right.
So
nobody knows.
Very interesting. But what I do know, Nick, is that next week, as far as we know, potentially normal Sunday show release. Last NCHC preview, the St. Cloud State Huskies coming in at number 4 here. Excited to talk about this one, obviously, for all our St. Cloud State fans. So if you have any questions, that's the preview that's coming up. We'll release something, obviously. But if you want to ask before then, we're happy to put them in the archives and get ready for our final preview of the season. And a lot of exciting things to talk about. The video board going up at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. And we are just a couple of weeks away, about 3.5 weeks away, Nick, from hockey season.
Yes,
and even less for NHL preseason. So very exciting things that we look forward to. So without further ado, Nick, for yourself as well as myself, follow us at Warming House Den on Twitter. Find us at at HuskiesWarmingHousePodcast.com, and we will see you soon from the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.